Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider, a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 165 and we're talking about Otatum Totius 11-12, which is on training using good psychology and discernment. Well, that's at least what I summarized as before. I'll tell you afterwards, that might not be the best summary. Those summaries that are on the reading planner when I just scan through the whole of the Vatican II documents back sometime last year. I forget exactly when. Anyways, if you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. And just talking about the summaries there, I give the summary right after this, at this point here, and that's the summary I made right now when I read it a little more in depth than I scanned it, 6, 8, 10 months ago, whatever it was. So yesterday we talked about seminarians being prepared to live chastity by being instructed in its gifts and its challenges. Today we're going to finish chapter 4, the careful development of spiritual training. And the summary is we need to train seminarians beyond the intellectual. Seminary life needs to form them immunely, and we need intense times for spiritual and pastoral formation. So paragraph 11 has 3 subparagraphs, but subparagraph C is really short, so I'm going to do A, then B, C. So A is about the need to train seminarians humanly, internally, and externally. And then B and C are about seminary life helping form the hearts of seminarians in that regard. So let's go straight ahead and read 11a. The norms of Christian education are to be religiously observed and properly complemented by newer findings of sound psychology and pedagogy. Therefore, by a wisely planned training, there is also to be developed in the students a due human maturity. This will be made especially evident in stability of mind and ability to make weighty decisions and in a sound evaluation of men and events. The students should be accustomed to work properly at their own development. They are to be formed in strength of character, and in general they are to learn to esteem the virtues which are held in high regard by men and which recommend it to a minister of Christ. Such virtues are sincerity of mind, a constant concern for justice, fidelity to one's promises, refinement in manners, modesty of speech, coupled with charity. So here, it's important to understand 2 terms here. Education, in some of the languages, also refers not just to learning your math and your language, whatever you learn in school, but also refers to how cultured you are, how your manners are, things like that, right? We in North America don't tend to use education that term, but that is how it's often used in other cultures. So when you're writing an international document, it can have that sense, right? And at the opposite side, pedagogy is the study of teaching kids, teaching young people, young adults included. And in many other countries, what we would call an education degree is a pedagogy degree, right? So my sister is she teaches in a Catholic school. Right now she teaches in a non-Catholic school, public school, but she has taught in a Catholic school at different times. And she has an education degree. But if she was in a Spanish-speaking country, she would say she has a pedagogia degree, pedagogy, right? She teaches French and Spanish, so she could teach in a Spanish-speaking country, right? So that's just how things are, just to understand those terminology, those terms. So here it's important to note that psychology and social sciences can be helpful to complement tradition. What I see sometimes is 2 extremes here. We have the ones who are like, let's just ignore everything about modern science and just go with the tradition and forget anything we've learned about modern science that might help us to do it more efficiently. At the other extreme, you have, let's just totally just whatever modern science says and forget the tradition. No, but what the council is asking for, what the church is asking for in this sense, is to have some kind of union between those 2. So it's not all just modern psychology or all just tradition, right? We keep the tradition, but we adapt it using the modern social sciences. And so here it's talking about the need for human maturity, right? This is what I said in the summary about internal human formation. You need to have maturity. You need to be self-motivated. You need to have character. You need to be able to decide, right? And those things are human traits, not like spiritual or intellectual traits, but those are human traits that are internal. And some of these, we talk about also the external ones. And the external ones express to a large extent what's internal, right? You have concern for justice. Is this priest concerned if there's injustice? If it looks like an innocent man is going to be condemned to death, what's his concern? if there's an abortion clinic going to be built 3 blocks in the parish, what's his concern? Those are the kind of things we want with a constant concern for justice. Fidelity to one's promises. If this priest says, oh, I'll cover the Tuesday Mass as the associate pastor, does the pastor know for certain that Tuesday Mass is covered, or he has to have to double, triple check, right? Fidelity. Refinement in manners. How do you eat? You don't just yard a slob and things like that, right? And then modesty in speech, coupled with charity. How do we speak about others? Are we modest? Do we speak with charity? So that's important. Those things are important for a priest to have. They aren't the things that are like absolutely beyond belief. If a priest doesn't have it, there's no way he can be a priest. Well, maybe some of them are, but if we have a priest who's a little bit of a slob, it's not the end of the world. But we all want priests who eat at least moderately dignified. They don't end up with soup or whatever on their clerics. At least not usually. If once in a while you have a spill of soup, well, we're all human. I've done that in my life as a priest. So let's read B and C, which is about seminary life helping form the hearts of seminarians. B. The discipline of seminary life is to be reckoned not only as a strong safeguard of community life and of charity, but also a necessary part of the total whole training formation. For thereby self-mastery is acquired, solid personal maturity is promoted, and the other dispositions of mind are developed, which very greatly aid the ordered and fruitful activity of the Church. Seminary discipline should be so maintained, however, that the students acquire an internal attitude, whereby they accept the authority of superiors from personal conviction, that is to say, from a motive of conscience, confer Romans 13, and for supernatural reasons. The norms of discipline are to be applied according to the age of the students, so that they themselves, as they gradually learn self-mastery, may become accustomed to use freedom wisely, to act spontaneously and energetically, and to work together harmoniously with their fellows and with the laity. C. The whole pattern of seminary life, permeated with the desire for piety and silence and a careful concern for mutual help, must be so arranged that it provides, in a certain sense, an initiation to the future life which the priest shall lead. It's important to remember what is the goal of the seminary. Because if we're going to design it well, we design everything with the goal in mind. And the goal is forming priests. Forming holy priests who can do a lot of ministry, who can run parishes, who can run schools, some of whom might come back and teach in the seminary, things like that. So it's not just intellectual formation. It's not just doing your classes. It's not just prayer, or it's not even just those two. It is forming the human virtues. It is forming them for ministry. Unless it's a contemplative community, a community or a diocese can't ordain a priest who's not able to exercise some ministry of the community or of the diocese. Because that is an important part of being a priest in a diocese or in a religious community. Many religious communities. Obviously, if you want to be a Carthusian or something like that, the ability to do pastoral ministry is a little bit different in how they consider it. And here we talk about the seminary needs to form human virtues, right? They mentioned self-mastery. Are we in control of ourselves? Are we able to make choices? When I'm playing soccer, am I able to control myself and not kick other seminarians in the shins? Maturity. How do I make my decisions? How do I carry myself? Obedience. And obedience not just from external things, but understanding it at a deeper internal level. Silence. There is a need for silence to really speak to God more fully. And then all this prepares them for the priest's life. It takes time. The discipline strives for this. And this number is really about these ends, these goals we want for priests, and not so much about the means, the exact means. It's saying that discipline must do this, but what rules of discipline and things like that, that's left to either the program of priestly formation or even in many cases to the individual rectors and formators at the seminaries. So moving on to paragraph 12, it talks about the needing periods focused on spiritual and pastoral formation and discernment. Often the discernment and spiritual formation are put together near the beginning, and the pastoral formation time is put somewhere from about halfway through to about 2/3 or 3/4 way through, depending a little bit on the exact seminary. But let's read the text first, and then I'll explain those details. In order that the spiritual training rest upon a more solid basis, and that the students embrace their vocation with a fully deliberate choice, it will be the prerogative of the bishops to establish a fitting period of time for a more intense introduction to the spiritual life. It will also be their charge to determine the opportuneness of providing for certain interruption in the studies or establishing a suitable introduction to pastoral work in order that they may more satisfactorily test the fitness of candidates for the priesthood. In accordance with the conditions of individual regions, it will also be the bishop's responsibility to make a decision about extending the age beyond the demanded at present by common law for the reception of sacred orders, and of deliberating whether it be opportune to rule that students at the end of their course in theology exercise the order of deacon for a fitting period of time before being promoted to the priesthood. So a quick note here before we go on to this is these things about the time for being priests and deacons here. In canon law, it says that you have to be 25 to be ordained. But in practice, at least in the U.S. and Canada, it's much more because you need about 9 years of seminary beforehand, and it's very rare to start that before 18. 18 plus 9 is 27. So that is practically about the youngest you can get ordained. I know a priest who was ordained earlier because he homeschooled and finished high school early and the seminary accepts them early. That's really an exception, but usually about 27 is the youngest you can be ordained, just based on the amount of formation we have in North America. And as a deacon, canon law says you need to be a deacon for 180 days before you're ordained a priest, and most dioceses do it for a year. And you can either do theology while you're doing this last year theology, or be out in ministry. And it is a very different experience as a deacon to do the two. And this 180 days can be dispensed. I was ordained a deacon at about a priest at about 170 days a deacon because of various things. So I was really close to 180. It wasn't just a total ignorance of the rule, but I was given an exemption from the law for that. Anyways, I forget the exact term there. So what's our main point here? We have an importance of spiritual formation, pastoral formation, discernment, and we're going to have dedicated periods set, right? And that's the important point. Spiritual formation, is going to be mixed with the discernment usually. And that's what we have now in American seminaries called the propedeutic year, where they understand how the spiritual life works, they understand what it means to be a priest, they spend a lot more time in prayer, less time studying, and hopefully they're able to discern that. In religious communities, we have what's called novitiate, which is 1 to 2 years, which is a similar kind of idea. You learn the spirit of the community, you learn to pray, you discern if you're called to the community. And I think that this is a good thing that diocesan seminaries are doing this. And then they have the pastoral training often later in formation. Traditionally in the U.S., there's been a pastoral year. I know for my community, when I was going through, we did 3 years. Now we generally do 2. And that is an extended period to show, hey, this person can live in the rectory. They can do the apostolate of the community or the diocesan apostolate. And it's important to see how they can do it. Sometimes now this is more split up, and they might have the longest being 8 months or something instead of being 15 months like it used to be. I'm not going to get into the exact details of this, but that is an important aspect that is talking about here that seminarians should have. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarCross produce another great podcast at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarCross Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraphs of Tatrum Totius, 13 to 15, on humanistic, scientific, and philosophical studies first, before we go on to theology. That's why you have to do a BA first, Bachelor of Arts first. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. Amen.